The enslaved had been named and renamed so many times that they didn't know what to call themselves. And after slavery, they searched to find an identity that made sense to them. Now, obviously, they didn't venture off too far from what they had been used to being called, but at least the subject was dealt with in some way and addressed. Now, in our final commentary on the book here, Been in the Storm So Long, The Aftermath of Slavery by Dr. Leon Litwack, we're going to see some mixed opinions on the topic of identity by some of the former slaves. Here we go.
We want to understand that we are no longer colored people, but Americans.
John Mercer Langston told a black gathering in 1866.
We have been called all manner of names.
Like black, Negro, the N-word, and colored people. All manner of names which were forced on them by other people.
I have always called our people Negroes. Perhaps you don't like it. I do. I want it to become synonymous with character.
He wanted Negro to be linked with ideas of good character, because at that time it was linked with slave and just about any other negative idea you can think of, and he wanted to change that.
We are no longer Negroes simply, no longer colored people simply, but a part of the great whole of the mighty American nation.
To affirm their American identity, blacks noted the various cultures that made up the civilizations of the world and the emergence of a new race in the United States. The word race is used a lot of the times as a synonym for ethnic identity or ethnicity, which is basically people who are culturally distinguishable from other groups, which is what he's referring to here by saying a new race in the United States. Whether descended from Europeans or Africans, they suggested, Americans, white and black, were in the process of developing racial characteristics as severely individual as those of Europeans, Asians, and Africans, meaning those known as whites and blacks in the USA had developed unique identities from those in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And by this time, the white man was clearly different from his European ancestors, just as Negroes were greatly different from their African ancestors. Surely, the voice of the AME Church would argue, no one could expect black people in the United States to be Africans after their lengthy residence in this land.
To say that we could have preserved our African characteristics after dwelling for almost 3 centuries upon this continent is most unphilosophical. Were it true, we would be the most stolid race of the world. But whoever credited the Negro for stolidity?
Stolid meaning unemotional or expressionless. So he's saying that if Negroes would have been on this land for 3 centuries and still kept all of their ancestors' African culture, then they would have been the most unemotional and unresponsive people on the planet, meaning slavery wouldn't have had any effect on them, which was far from the case.
The fact is, we are thoroughly Americans. And by reason of the fact that we have been here longer than the majority of the new American race, we have developed more fully than they the characteristics by which it is to be known.
Which is very true. There are many people of Asian and European descent that had ancestors that were relatively recent arrivals to this land. Many of them arrived in the mid to late 1800s, and millions of them came around that time, right? All the way up until the early 1900s, you had millions of people migrate to this country, right? It doesn't make them any less American, but the Negroes had been here much longer than that, right? And claiming Africa basically just throws all of that to the wind. Even as blacks emphasized their American roots, they could not agree on whether they were Negro, colored, black, or African Americans. And from our view, all of those names are unfitting, especially Negro, colored, and black. We look at all of those as slave titles, right? The African American name is not bad at all. The only thing that is wrong with that is that it's incorrect, right? At least that's how we see it. But people, they can be called whatever they want to call, right? I'll call people black, Negro, colored, or African American if that's what they want to be called, because we do respect people's rights to identify just as we expect others to respect ours. The ongoing debate over how they should be addressed revealed at the same time differences over how they conceptualized themselves as a race and a regard for how whites employed the various terms. The objections to Negro, for example, rested partly on its association with slavery and the tendency of whites to use it as a term of reproach.
We call each other colored people, black people, but not Negro because we use that word in Secesh times.
A South Carolina freedman testified in 1863. Both Negro and black also suggested unmixed ancestry and hence excluded large numbers of colored people.
Is your chairman a Negro?
James Lynch asked the delegates to a convention of the colored people of Tennessee.
Or your secretary, or any of your officers, or your other members or those sergeants sitting over there? They are all mixed blood. We are not ashamed of the term Negro, but to call it a Negro convention is a lie. It is very hard to tell whether there is any pure blood or not, because white men used to love colored women very much.
And that they did for sure. Nor did African fare very well, particularly at a time when black leaders sought to educate their people to their Americanness. Henry M. Turner, a leader in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, agreed with several of his ministerial colleagues that the term African should be stricken from the title, if only because it suggested exclusion. On the other hand,
unlike the most of my race,
he claimed pride in being called a Negro. He liked being called a Negro. Many other formerly enslaved did not, but for some reason he did.
When I am walking the streets of a city and hear someone say, "There goes a Negro preacher," or Negro chaplain, I feel a peculiar exaltedness.
He liked the ring of it, I guess, right? That's his preference. By the 1870s, the issue was far from settled, though colored seemed the most acceptable term, and a Louisiana newspaper indicated a willingness to accept Negro as long as it was capitalized like any other nationality.
The French, German, Irish, Dutch, Japanese, and other nationalities are honored with a capital letter, but the poor sons of Ham must bear the burden of a small n.
And I give them a pass because they were still wobbly in the mind from slavery. They couldn't really think too far past the names that they had already been accustomed to. So as long as they could get Negro capitalized, that was good enough for them, right? Now watch this. Whatever terminology they used to describe themselves, some blacks preferred to look, act, and sound as little Negro, colored, or black as possible. This is talking about a group of blacks who were doing this because they really wanted to be accepted by whites. By adopting the fashions, the lifestyles, the manners, and even the color of white society, they would be absorbed into the dominant society that much sooner. That was their life's mission. And this particular consciousness is still around today, right? It hasn't gone anywhere. The advertisements appearing in black newspapers, for example, not only acknowledged the premium placed on whiteness, but sought to place that aspiration within everyone's reach. If they could not turn white, they could purchase various devices calculated to bring them to the threshold of whiteness. Now here's what the black newspaper marketed to other blacks.
There cometh glad tidings of joy to all, to young and to old, to great and to small. The beauty which once was so precious and rare is free for all, and all may be fair, by the use of Chasteller's white liquid enamel.
You see the madness? This is what some blacks began doing right after slavery. They, not the white man in this instance, tried to capitalize off of the black inferiority complex and sell them skin lightening products, right? This was wild, wasn't it? Still other advertisements promised scientific treatments that would enable black women to excel.
The famed beauty of the Caucasians.
And this thinking is what assisted in the creation of things like the hot comb and other products to straighten the hair of women with the rich brown skin, right? We're looking at the Negro consciousness in full effect, extra wobbly in the mind from slavery, and doing things to demonstrate to the world that they hate themselves, right? What they could not achieve with skin whiteners or hair treatments, some blacks hope to attain by modeling their social functions and attire on white society. If they could not be absorbed into that society, they would establish their own society within a society, a replica of that from which they were excluded. Such pretentiousness, however, particularly when it manifested itself in lavish expenditures, provoked bitter responses in the black community. A different segment of blacks were not going for it. William J. Whipper, a northern-born black who settled in South Carolina after the war, berated the
worshippers of false gods
he found among his own people.
Fashion rules the hour,
he wrote in 1866,
and like menial slaves, we do its bidding. The street, the church, and the ballroom are the theaters for its display of presumptive impudence.
When was this? 1866, when some blacks were spending more effort on the outer appearance than the inner. It simply made no sense. To obscure their lowly station in life, blacks were expending money on luxuries which they could ill afford, thereby compounding their poverty in a vain effort to hide it. Now, there's nothing wrong with luxuries, but luxuries are meant for people who are comfortable and have all of their basic needs met. Blacks, in many cases, were struggling and still trying to live the luxury life, which is backwards, right? They were supposed to be hyper-focused on saving, hard work, ethics, and developing better values. But they were busy trying to appear like they had it made in life.
Our real condition is obscured by falsehood. In our attempts to cheat others, we cheat ourselves. We wear fine clothing, silks, satins, broadcloth, and trinkets for the purpose of representing our wealth, while every person possessing a grain of common sense thinks quite to the contrary.
Anyone with some common sense could see right through the act. That's what he's referring to. The Negroes weren't fooling anyone else other than themselves. In their attempts to emulate whites, Whipper concluded, black people were totally ignoring the system of economy and industry that would ultimately enable them to achieve that objective. Making that point even more explicit, a black newspaper in Louisiana suggested that only the ownership of land would bring to blacks the respectability they now sought by indulging themselves in the white man's fashions and follies.
Because we had to put up with a homespun suit before emancipation, we are determined to wear a silk one now, no matter at what cost to our stomachs or our landlords. We are a poor people. Everybody knows it. We are an ignorant people. The fact speaks for itself. We are an inexperienced people, as every day's transactions will prove, and yet it is a painful fact that we will spend more time and money to appear what we are not than it would cost to be what we pretend to be.
You see that? These are realities that we're talking about. The uncomfortable truths that people try to look past. But it must be dealt with, and dealt with honestly. That's what we're dealing with. And yet this same newspaper that scorned lavish dress and entertainments featured articles describing fancy balls of colored people, the finery of their clothes, and the excellence of their repasts. Indeed, in the very same issue and on the same page as the editorial on extravagance among colored people appeared the fashion department, with tips on summer styles and novelties. Similarly, the same newspapers that extolled the virtues of blackness and eloquently appealed to race pride often included advertisements on how black people could make themselves more white. This stuff is wild, isn't it? The paradox did not lend itself to any easy or immediate resolution, but the frank discussion of such questions did force blacks to examine critically who they were and the nature of their relationship to white society. If some were naturally drawn toward the models and values of that society, still others thought the loss of racial distinctiveness too heavy a price to pay for admission. To ape the ways of a people who mocked, degraded, and ostracized them, moreover, in the expectation they could gain the respect of such people, would most likely be an exercise in futility and reinforce their feelings of inferiority. Which is why the goal should never be the acceptance from other people. The main goal should be self-acceptance, and other people's acceptance comes as a byproduct of that. And if it doesn't come, oh well, right? Long as you accept yourself. To shed their Negro-ness, whitewash their culture, and deny their ancestral homeland would result in still more self-hatred and self-deprecation.
They seem to think that by repudiating the word colored, they would become white.
A veteran black abolitionist observed
that though they were as black a man as I, they, by rejecting that word colored, would directly become as white as the natives of this country.
They were rejecting it for the wrong reason. They rejected it because they wanted to be accepted by whites, not because it was a name given by the slave master or anything like that, but simply to get closer to the whites, which is wild. James Lynch, before embarking on his political career in Mississippi, thought he understood the type all too well, those who placed no value on the ability of men of their own race, who adopted the opinions respecting them that most whites held, who preferred white men as religious instructors, teachers, physicians, and lawyers because they were white, who disparaged their own color and thereby paid homage to the alleged superiority of the Anglo-Saxon. And this consciousness is still here today. And invariably, if such individuals should be flattered, feted, or rewarded by whites,
they will kiss the hands of the oppressor and ally themselves with the enemies or disparagers of their race.
And that's why we don't trust nor distrust people just because they have a certain skin color. You got to know what type of ideas they have operating in their mental system, right? What type of seeds are planted in the garden of their mind, right? And what type of values they have, because people play all types of games regardless of skin color. To counter the self-debasing images with which their people had been inculcated, black spokesmen needed to confront their cultural and national origins, while almost unanimously rejecting immigration and affirming their American heritage and identity. They might have been expected to harbor ambivalent feelings about their relationship to Africa. To identify with Africa raised the specter of a separate nationality, as well as awkward questions about backwardness and semi-barbarism, and might encourage those whites who still wished to return them there. For some blacks, in fact, the remoteness of Africa, both geographically and culturally, and the effects of race mixing in the United States only served to accentuate their Americanness.
We are not Africans,
One black leader proclaimed,
but a mixed race, mingling Saxon, Indian, and African blood.
and if you don't believe it, then take a DNA test and you'll find out. And so we can see that some of the stuff that we've been talking about in regards to identity, these are things that have already been said way back in the day, right? Most of it is nothing new. It's just that certain narratives have been suppressed while others have been pushed for whatever reason and whatever agenda people have going on, right? That's why it's important to study for yourself so you can make informed decisions, because some people will lead others down the rabbit hole for their own personal gain. And we have to be mindful of that and be on the lookout for that. And so with that being said, hopefully you have enjoyed the commentary on this book here, Been in the Storm So Long, The Aftermath of Slavery by Dr. Leon Litwack. He did a phenomenal job on this book, right? This book is very important because it bridges the gap between slavery and Reconstruction. And like I said, Dr. Leon Litwack did a phenomenal job on putting this book together, right? This book won the Pulitzer Prize in 1980, which is essentially the highest award that can be given and the most prestigious award that's given to history books, right? And a lot of people in position have read this book, right? The average American may not have read it, but many people in leadership roles have, because it's the real deal, right? As we've seen, if you've been following along. And so with that being said, what we're going to do is we are going to put this book down and we will continue by picking up another as we continue to pull the consciousness out of the pit. And so with that, I thank you for your time and I thank you for your participation. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael. And I'll see you in the free world.